And it's live now. Hello, I'm John from Broadsheet. You're very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. We're joined by Derek Mooney, public affairs consultant and a Broadsheet columnist and erstwhile member of Fianna Fáil. Good evening, Derek.
Former member of Fianna Fáil.
Former member. Estranged or whatever, yeah.
Estranged, yeah.
Yeah. And Derek had a column today regarding United Ireland, I guess, is the best thing to put. You didn't see the Clareburn live show tonight?
Unfortunately, no, I don't. I'm going to watch it on the RTE player, all right. Unfortunately, I got caught up in it. I just have a family call that to do with. So
this is one of your three significant things that were going to happen this week.
Yeah, what I was basically saying was, look, compared to last week, I think this week is a more significant week. The most important one is yesterday's, the census in Northern Ireland. We have Jim O'Callaghan's address tomorrow to the Sydney Sussex University in Cambridge. But tonight as well, tonight's debate, and it's an interesting discussion. And I think the fact that that Clareburn show wasn't just a poll, it wasn't just looking at poll numbers. But they also had senior political leaders on it as well, was significant.
Yeah. There's Jim O'Callaghan's debating an Italian.
No, it's not. It's a discussion. It's a seminar. So what he'll do is he'll give a speech, and then this guy will sit down and kind of go through what makes it's a professor.
Right. Will Jim be laying out the sort of rebel Fianna Fáil position, perhaps?
I wouldn't call it the rebel Fianna Fáil position. I might be tempted to call it the more traditional, the more mainstream Fianna Fáil position. That's a separate matter. But then again, I would say that, wouldn't I? No. I think just based on what was in the Business Post yesterday, and in the Belfast Telegraph this morning, I think he's going to take an approach about, well, look, how would this work? What are the new constitutional arrangements? And it's not trying to prescribe it or set out this is what they need to be. This is what we need to envisage. We need to look how broad this can be. The mechanism by which a referendum would happen, which is it's a Secretary of State, but in real terms, can a Secretary of State from Northern Ireland determine that by themselves? That if we're going to have a referendum, we wouldn't be necessarily have a one north and south. So I imagine that's a lot of that, but just extrapolating out. But certainly from what I got from the Business Post yesterday, I don't think it's any great secret that I know Jim reasonably well.
Yeah.
But Jim is a man of who keeps his own thoughts to himself, and in terms of what he's against it, he's not kind of flagging up in advance what's in it. But knowing based on previous contributions Jim has made, he's done Zoom calls with Fianna Fáil members. He's done Zoom calls, a lot of them. He did a very good debate, I think, within the last 6 months with Ian Paisley Jr. For Ogre Fianna Fáil. So I think there's been lots of little insights. So I think might be just pulling these together into a single kind of comprehensive approach.
Okay. We have Micheál now, actually.
Okay.
Sinn Féin, I met SPLP.
1 second.
I went into unionist homes, and it was when they said to me that our uncle is murdered because he wears a uniform doesn't change the fact that he's my uncle. And I went down to Cork after being in Belfast with all the...
Sorry, play that again, Derek.
Yeah, Pamtal, yeah.
Oh, the violence would end. And that was part of my teenage years. I joined politics because of Northern Ireland, even though I lived in Cork. I was that passionate about it. I had early, fun, simplistic views about the North when I grew up as a child. It was Brits, everything would be solved. I learned. I went up as a young student to meet every single political party. I met loyalists, met the UDA, met Sinn Féin, I met SPLP. I went into unionist homes. And it was when they said to me that our uncle is murdered because he wears a uniform doesn't change the fact that he's my uncle. And I went down to Cork after being in Belfast with all those meetings with a changed kind of perspective. I never thought the violence would end.
So that's Micheál.
I think it's a very honest approach. And by the way, I think it's one that's shared by a lot of people from the same generation. And I've been roughly the same generation as Micheál. I mean, I think what he says, to his own credit, and I think to the credit of other people, which is sometimes people try to talk about the North from a distance and have not gone to the North, have not engaged. I've been in various places in the same way that Micheál has been. I've been to the Shankill Road, I've been to the Falls Road. I've engaged with a whole range of people. One of the most enriching periods, or one example experiences in my life, was being part of the Glencree Peace and Reconciliation setup, and having attended.
You made a lot of friends there, didn't you?
Yeah, I've attended workshops there for many years before and after the Good Friday Agreement, And so therefore I would have a reasonably good network across the whole political divide, not all of whom we agree with at any times, but at least that you have people that you can interact with and kind of get a sense of what's happening. So that's vitally important. And I think the more politicians who have that network here, and I think he's right to do that.
Yeah. What's Jim saying that Micheál isn't?
Well, no, I think what I've been saying, and I've been banging this drum for the last while, which is, look, I say quite explicitly this morning, which is like last week, Micheál spoke about the Shared Ireland Initiative. He spoke about the need for reconciliation. He talked about the turmoil that exists post-Brexit. And that's absolutely accurate. It isn't what he's saying, it's what he's not saying. And what he's not saying is, well, look, the Constitution, not a date, strange enough a date is that, because I also quote Professor Colm Harvey in my piece today. And it's the one thing I slightly disagree with Colm Harvey on, which is setting a specific date, a timeline possibly, but not a specific date. But what I'm saying is, look, what you're seeing is in a whole range of places, and this is the real positive. This is genuinely positive. Across almost every academic institution in this country, there's a unit that's looking at how would unity work? How would you make this happen? How would you create the conditions for it? What are the processes need? And I think for Micheál to say, no, we shouldn't be having these discussions now. We should wait for those for some other days is not helpful. And I think you need to engage with that. And that's my point. That's my criticism.
Sure. This is Gregory Campbell, so the unionist.
DUP, yep.
A unionist position.
We just do not get it. We are British. Those three words. We are British. There's nothing you can say, nothing you can do that will change that. Just as the people who say we are Irish, there's nothing I can say or do that will change that. What we all have to do, in my view, is to try and devise systems of government in Northern Ireland and in your country, in the Republic, that all our communities are comfortable with, that no one feels threatened, no one feels endangered, no one feels that their citizenship, their cultural identity or outlook is endangered in any way.
The way I respond to that is, first and foremost, that's actually a move on to what Gregory Campbell's position would have been some years ago, because the acceptance of that there was an absolute right to aspire to Irish unity was not a DUP position. It was, no, this is British and that's the end of it. So don't forget, that's why they originally opposed the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. So there has been a moving forward. So, and you have to recognize these things. I guess happened. But what you also need to recognize is that Northern Ireland is changing, which is unionism is not a majority anymore. It is the largest single grouping within the North, but it's not the majority. But it's and this is something that Micheál himself analysed some years ago, which is the growth of the other, that other group of people who don't describe themselves as either unionist or nationalist.
Well, you're a better observer at this, Derek. He seemed pretty unequivocal there. Campbell, are you saying his position softened since?
I'm saying that, but the position that he acknowledges that there is, because he turns around and he says, right, I have a right to be British, and I'm British. You're not going to change that, and I'm not, and you shouldn't be trying to change my view on that, and neither will I try to change your view about me Irish. That's an advancement on the DUP's position of some years ago. So I mean that there is, bizarrely enough, I do actually see some, not a huge softening in his
Okay.
But there is now. By the way, he's also the same man during the Northern Assembly was doing his curry my yogurt instead of referring to somebody as call, who was opposed to respecting the other person's cultural traditions and language traditions. So again, which is I don't want to overstate the remark, but at the end of the day, which is. That is in itself, the acknowledgement that people have a right to aspire to United Ireland was at the core of the Good Friday Agreement.
Right, I think...
but it's 22 years later. The Good Friday Agreement was a normalisation, but it never got rid of the two ambitions.
I think Campbell was responding to this from Varadkar.
I think...
It's some set they've got there.
Absolutely, yeah.
We agree that the tectonic plates of Irish politics have changed, and this conversation has now begun. The Good Friday Agreement provides for a referendum north and south on reunification, so it's a legitimate political objective and aspiration to want that. I think the mistake would be setting a date now. It's almost like setting a date for your marriage before you've had a
Right,
courtship.
so not even 2028, as Bertie Ahern, negotiator of the Good Friday Agreement, said might be appropriate.
I think you do those three things first. You make the Good Friday Agreement work the way it's not now. You engage with unionists.
But is 6 years' time too soon?
And we talk about ourselves, about what we're willing to change to accommodate the million people in Ireland who are British. But to answer your question, and it might not be too soon, by the way, but it's not the date that is what we should be focusing on. It's getting those three pieces into place first is what we should focus on.
Yeah.
That's bizarrely enough. This is, by the way, I feel really uncomfortable because that's not bizarrely desperately far from what I said earlier in terms of difference between setting a timeline and setting a timetable.
Or what Micheál Martin is. I mean, there's no it seems like everybody's on the same page, doesn't it?
It's not. I think there are nuances in this. I think there are subtleties in this. But what we hear from Micheál Martin is basically trying to say, look, we must park the discussion on constitution. We must park the discussion on the constitutional question. We must park and focus. Yeah. I'm going, no, first and foremost, this is a civic society discussion. This is something that's happening. So for the Taoiseach to say, no, will you try and stop that conversation is wrong. Number two is the role of the Taoiseach is the leader of nationalism within this island. And if he decides to abrogate that responsibility, well, then it'll fall to somebody else. Mm. And I think there is a certain degree, which is I turn around and say, look, I make the point earlier, which is look, that's the old maxim about a leader without followers is a man just going for a walk. Sometimes that's been necessary in politics. Sometimes it's been necessary for people to get well ahead of the crowd. My fear in this one is not that Micheál's getting ahead with the crowd. I think he's so far behind where the crowd is. I think he's so far behind where the middle ground is. This hasn't been led by extremes. This is academia. This is think tanks within Queen's University, within DCU, within a whole range of universities who are looking at this. In Liverpool universities, by the way, it's also happening in a different context.
And it's got a lot of post-Brexit support from the EU.
But it's not that, but it's partly that, but it's also, this is happening in the context of the United Kingdom itself coming apart. When you heard Mark Drayford, who is not a well-known Welsh nationalist, who is somebody who opposed Plaid Cymru in Wales, who's actually turned around and saying, look, the union isn't working for us.
Well, exactly. I mean, Campbell goes on, we are British, but what does that mean at this stage?
Well, that's what I'm saying to you, which is, and that becomes a difficulty. Now, by the way, that is the worst time to be negotiating with somebody. When somebody feels that their identity is threatened, they're not in a position to sit down and negotiate with you. So therefore, there is a responsibility on people to say, well, look, this is the floor we're going to put under it. There is no threat here. This is why, but we need to say to, listen, folks, it isn't that there is a timeline, but there's a timeline going to be posted this. What happens if Scotland votes
in the next
5 years?
Yeah, I mean,
on independence.
Well, that's what I mean. I think that'll be
that becomes a catalyst.
Yeah,
and we need to, and by the way, the lesson from Brexit is you need to start preparing now, and the earlier you prepare, the better. I think that this is where Micheál is actually completely contradicting himself, which is he's saying, no, we mustn't prepare now, and therefore we can delay down the line. He said, but no, this is, if something is coming, let's prepare now. It doesn't mean we're setting, because I think this is the one thing I think we'd be very careful about. We cannot set the dimensions of it. We cannot turn around and say, okay, we're going to have a discussion of the Constitution, and we're going to decide what the new Constitution of a United Ireland, if there was to be one, would look like. Well, that's not going to work either. No. So therefore, you have to start this discussion, but you start putting it together, and you show to unionists, and there are progressive and moderate unionists. I mean, Gregory Campbell still isn't on the progressive wing of the Unionist Party. The parties that have seen the greatest growth in the last couple of years in Northern Ireland is the Alliance Party and SDLP clawing back support that had previously lost.
Yeah, but if you could
the Alliance Party, which is
if you could build
the view of some people, a soft Unionist party.
Yeah, but if you could build up a case, and you could, if Micheál Martin had sort of entered into the giving sort of like more of a positive reaction, or if he had given more rumblings in your direction, Derek, it might have brought them more to the extreme up the north. I mean, the unionists reaching towards it more.
I'm not too sure that. No, because the one thing unions don't, unions are not going to be soft-soaped either. Because it isn't going to. They need to know the color of the money that's on the table. They need to know the person that negotiates with on the other side, and they need to know for saying. I mean, again, you can look at Gregory Campbell's position. The two positions I cite in my article today is from Peter Robinson and Gavin Robinson, both of whom say, look, it is probable, it is likely that there's going to be a referendum in the next decade on the border poll. And by the way, the census today doesn't make it more likely, etc., but it just it is a statistical background against which this will be measured.
I'll tell you what, Derek, will we go into the papers, because your column.
I just want to get. Oh no, I mean I could go on at this for hours. Yeah. Yeah,
and I could listen to you for hours. Rising cases of threat to April 5th opening. Well, this was unexpected.
Shock horror. Look again. It's. I think there's almost no level about which this is not just debilitating, draining, exhausting.
Do you still say
people need hope
at this stage, Derek?
Which?
Do you still say trust NPHET? And I mean, are you beginning to?
I don't. I think I said a couple of weeks ago, which is I believe we need to say, look, what should be giving us hope at the moment is vaccinations, and it's not. Vaccination program. You can criticize, as you can say, but it's not working out nearly as much as expected. I strongly believe that the way to do that is if we are getting 1.25 million vaccines in April, May, and June, move to a deferred second dose regimen, and just get the vaccines out there. And if we can vaccinate, the next question is, do we have the capacity to deliver these? We need to be delivering about 60,000 vaccines a day into arms between now and the end of June. Whether we're doing it at double doses or we're doing it as a single dose and second dose deferred. That is a hell of an out, and it needs to happen. And I think but I need to show that they can do this. I think the best thing the government could say now is, look, what we're going to do is we're going to have as many people vaccinated once so that we can start an opening up. But people need a route map out of this. They need a way. They need to be shown a way out of this. This in, up, down, wait, it's up this way, could be this that way. It is killing. Why do we have lockdowns? We have lockdowns so that hospitals can cope with the volume of cases. That's the purpose of a lockdown. A lockdown is not a treatment in and of itself. Do we need to revisit how we do these lockdowns? Unfortunately, I think the government has lost the dressing room on this one. I think there's a lot of problems. Do I trust NPHET? Yeah, basically I do trust the next experts in NPHET. But do I think that they have the entire picture? No, I don't. I think there's another picture there. There are many other experts who are saying, look, there's other things we factored in here. We cannot play around with these variants. We cannot play around with infection chase. But by the way, we are, as a nation, in level 5. I think most people are observing rules 75, 80%. They're not breaking them flagrantly. They're not ignoring them in whole scale. Right, but I think, as I said to you recently, which is I've had a bit of a health issue, so I'm up and down to the hospital every couple of days. And I am very much struck by the number of white vans, the amount of activity I see out on the roads, and I see, because I have to go 8 kilometers to the hospital. And I'm struck by the amount of activity I'm seeing. I'm struck by what's out there. And I think a lot of people are, not because they wish to break the rules, but because of absolute necessity, because they just need to get out there. And I think the state needs to recognize that. Now, the difficulty is, I think what NPHET's worried about, the government's worried about, if they go from level 5 to level 4, the people will immediately move themselves to level 3. There's a loss of faith and confidence here. So it needs to be accompanied with something else, which is something dramatic on vaccines. And I believe that is going to a deferred second dose, so that we know that the next 1.5 million vaccines that come in April are going to vaccinate 1.25 million people, rather than 650,000 people.
Right.
I think that could be seriously giving people hope. And by the way, you see it. I think there's 1 or 2 of the papers there, lasersy, which is, I don't know if it's the Examiner. I can't remember just off the top of my head. Which is the fact that people can go to nursing homes today is just so big for so many people that they can visit their relatives in nursing homes.
Yeah.
We didn't think we would have to wait till March, the end of March, and the beginning of April to see.
Well, I'm obligated to say, I mean, most of our readers would, wholeheartedly back what you're saying, Derek. I mean, but I feel that my personal position, anyway, as you know, is kind of probably the opposite of where you're at. But
but again, which is, I don't believe NPHET have the entirety of this one. I think there needs to be some unlocking. There needs to be some absolute delivery of hope, and I think there needs to be something. I think if there is not some movement next week, I think whatever little faith and confidence the government retains of people on this will be exhausted, and then I think is a really, really dangerous position.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. The Look of Love, this beautiful photograph of
it's an extraordinary photograph, and RT News tonight had several examples of people, of sons and daughters, and people, by the way, people my age, visiting nursing homes to see their parents, etc. And it is just, it is it's a small measure of hope, but people really need to see more and need to feel more and need to feel it. I was talking to an uncle of mine this morning. Now, when I say an uncle, he's less than 10 years older than me.
yeah.
And he was just saying just the frustration, etc., around him, etc. And that's it. And by the way, as people become vaccinated, that's going to create its own dynamic. Because what the government also needs to remember is in Northern Ireland, they're now at 50% of the population vaccinated. One dose, I grant you, but 50% of the population vaccinated. Within the next month or so, Northern Ireland is going to be moving to some visible form of unblocking.
Okay.
And that's going to create even greater pressure here. And it's going to create a greater contrast. And people see what's happening in the UK, they see what's happening in Northern Ireland long before they see what's happening further overseas.
Okay. Besborough, there's a
yeah, I saw this. This is the
Irish expert
treated like a crime scene. Yeah,
yeah, an Irish expert who helped identify the remains of victims of this Srebrenica mass atrocity says the Besborough mother and baby home site should be treated as a potential crime scene. It's a long overdue statement, but fantastic. Somebody in fairly prominent academic position is coming out.
It is, but again, which is we've discussed this in various other contexts, even in terms of the actual reporting, and in terms of how people have been spoken to since the rest of it. This is not something which the government, and I talk about the civil service, the government.
No, they're far from that. Yeah, but
which has had, like, we've had a series of things over the last 20 to 30 years, which has been looking back at the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and what was actually happening behind the scenes in Ireland. And so we should have developed a better methodology, a better process for dealing with this openly, and recognizing that you can only deal with this openly. You can only deal with this by being completely transparent. That trying to shield out situations and is not going to work.
I know, but try telling them that they will. They're just waiting for everybody to die. I think anybody.
I genuinely don't believe it's as cynical as that. But however, I think there are too many fears about the unknown and where this can go to. And my attitude is that situation is actually far more dangerous than actually where this could actually lead to.
Well, I'm not a great fan of the UN, but it would be great if some international body could come in, and because we're obviously incapable of dealing with this part of our history. I mean, the truth and reconciliation. Well, I
mean, there was a period where we seemed that we were on top of it, and I just don't know what's happened in the last couple of years. I don't know what it is, which is we've now become exceptionally conservative and exceptionally cautious.
In
maybe there's, I don't know. I think, and the problem is, I think we've become deeply legalistic in it, incredibly legalistic and adversarial on this, and that is not helping.
Yeah, hugely against the survivors. We've hit crisis point. 193 days of lockdown means half of boozers and restaurants to shut down forever, I think is the point.
Yeah, I think that came from a Restaurants Association study, which is in terms of people. I mean, I think, again, I think that is possibly one of the main concerns from this is, which is we now see what the state of the economy is like. We know what the lockdown is like, but places are nominally still potentially open because of PUP. What happens when the things open up fully and that they're no longer viable?
But these were traditionally Fianna Fáil, like they would have
been small business would have been a cohort. Yeah.
They must feel very let down.
Well, I would assume that there is a whole range of things. I don't think it's just publicans. I think it's customers. I think it's a whole range of other people.
Yeah,
but I mean, if you want to look at why is Fianna Fáil at 14%?
Yeah, I'm not sure those polls are correct. We can beat fourth wave. We haven't even had the fourth wave, have we?
Well, I think what they're saying is that this latest increase, if you look at over the last couple of days, it's been starting to each up, and NEFIS are modelling that this will start increasing. This will start kind of climbing back up again, and they're seeing as they track it. So they're now seeing this as a fourth wave. Now, what they tend to do is they flag these early and say, well, look, we're now seeing the early stages of this.
Right.
But again, the messaging in terms of that everyone needs to do more, a lot of people cannot do anymore. They physically cannot do anymore.
We literally don't know what to do. It's funny. Somebody would say, how do you resist these measures? And how do you...
See, I don't think there's I don't think there's
no way. We're trapped, even if you are against it or for it. We're just like me and you just,
There is, look, again, which is, I mean, what people say, well, where does lockdown been shown not to work? I think a lot of people point to Sweden. Now, Sweden's incidence is not dramatically different, but I mean, there is an argument that they have protected their economy, but it's protecting their economy more than protecting anything else. But the difficulty with it is that there has to be, the people thought this was a rolling process. If they thought this is go through a couple of weeks of this, we come out, then we come back into some form of gradual normality, I think they could deal with it. Yeah. I think it is this feeling that this has gone on for so long and there is no end in sight. That's the killer.
Yeah. And Derek, like you were even sort of a while ago sort of saying, okay, give it a few more weeks, but you've seen it yourself. It's just.
Well, no, what I've also said is that, look, that there needs to be something. The idea that again, which is that whole Einstein line about just that the definitive measures, thinking you could do the same thing all over again, you're going to get different results. What was the belief was, okay, well, the vaccination program will have enrolled at a sufficient level. We thought we were going to get 1.4 million doses. We only got whatever it was. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of blame that's going to Brussels that deserves it. There's a lot of blame that's going to Brussels that isn't merited, that needs to stay here. The blame is here. Right. But I'm saying, so therefore, I believe there needs to be a game changer. There needs to be some big change in plan. And this needs to be done at the macro level. But this kind of incremental, where we're sitting down and we're talking to the same people we spoke to last week, last month, last year, ain't getting us there. And there needs to be some big thinking about this. There needs to be something. And by the way, we're sitting on the doorstep of two places that are showing the mainland of Great Britain, the Northern Ireland, and the other part of this island, showing if you go with a mass one-dose vaccine, it's not Johnson's plan, it was Tony Blair's plan originally. Yeah. And if you go with that you can get twice as many people vaccinated in the
That's what you were suggesting a few weeks ago.
I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks. Yeah. Now, I'm not the only one saying it, but I think it really needs to be seriously looked at. And I will be horrified if there isn't somebody somewhere seriously looking at this.
Bernard Purcell's Irish World. Bernard hopefully will be joining us tomorrow. He was also sick as well. Sorry, Derek, are you okay?
Oh, Grant, yeah, no.
You look very well. I was.
Oh no, it's a bloody hereditary thing. It's only a bloody yoke on my leg. It just some of the veins getting tied up. Anyway.
Excuse my language, but yeah. But you look very well. I'm glad. I was worried about you there. Don't let the UK, EU jabber hit all the vaccines, say Ireland.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, which is, I think it comes from the Taoiseach this morning on I think it was on Morning Ireland, where he had said, look, that we were against a full ban on the export of vaccines from Europe. And I don't think it's an unfair point, because Europe doesn't own these vaccines. The fact that they're manufactured in Europe, but again, which is vaccines that are in Europe that are going somewhere else, that they're not going to Europeans. So there needs to be some, I mean, the arrangement with AstraZeneca has not worked out, is not working out, and that they have fallen by anywhere between 50 to 60% of their expected deliveries.
Okay. The UK papers say different, but
well, they say that, but I think there is actually some just simple empirical evidence in this, in terms of, you look at vaccines are leaving. I mean, America's not exporting vaccines except under its own control, and they're going to Mexico and going to Canada. They're going to places on its immediate borders.
Right. Derek,
there was 250,000 vaccines leaving from Italy. I can't remember what's going to Australia, somewhere else. I'm kind of going, okay, but
and they stopped it, didn't they? Yeah. Now,
my understanding is that there will be a statement on Wednesday from the Commission with a proposal which is not a ban, but is some restructuring within this.
Okay. GEA in England is back, set for 29th of March, return to full contact training. And
again, I think that's another part of what we need to see in April, which is just kids, outdoor activities, particularly for kids.
Yeah, GA won't be back by then, won't it?
I'm not too sure if it will, but I mean, there needs to be some training or something. Like, I mean, there won't be kind of people on terraces and people viewing matches, but actually that people can train and can actually just interact. I think it has to.
So Sturgeon got cleared of breaching the code. She misled the inquiry, but
well, no. What it's actually it's more than that. It's basically what it says is that he goes through the claims, and all the claims. The breaching of the ministerial code consists of, did she mislead Parliament? Did she mislead the Commission directors? And he says, and did she cover up knowledge of the conversations and the phone calls? And he says, on balance, he believes she doesn't, and therefore there is no breach of the ministerial code.
Okay.
Now, this isn't a get out of jail free card, but it is something. I mean, the Tories and everyone else were building up on this one.
Yeah.
Look, you will never take the politics out of politics. do not forget that there's a Scottish election coming up in May, where the SNP, despite all of this, despite its own massive internal battle between herself and head the ball, Alex Salmond, where the SNP is still, yet again in another poll, is still ahead, still
she's
well
very
ahead,
popular, isn't she there?
She's, and by the way, she's been an extraordinary leader, where Boris Johnson, understandably, is getting a huge amount of credit for how he's handling the vaccine rollout. She was getting an extreme amount of credit long before that for how she was actually handling the process. And don't forget, it's less than 3 to 4 or 5 months since people were talking about what a hames Boris Johnson had made of the whole system in the UK.
Okay, yeah. Well, teach your dog, the Times, teach your dog to talk. Next, they want their own magazine. Overseas travel ban.
Memories.
Yeah. Overseas travel ban extended until July. This is in the UK. Fines of 5,000 for trying to leave country. Third wave.
Again, which is this is by the way, this is the fact of it, which is, and by the way, this is why we need to be mature about the vaccines leaving Europe, which is, there's a very good paper, and which I was just reading the other day, which is about the number of vaccines going to other countries, which is, by the way, guys, if kind of wealthy countries hoard up all the vaccines for themselves, this thing is going to run wild in South America, Asia, the African subcontinent, the whole lot is going to go wild everywhere else. And suddenly we're going to have new variants, and they're going to be traveling around. So look, it's in our own interest to vaccinate everyone.
Okay.
People in their own country,
well, not me.
Neighbours, etc.
Just leave me alone.
Look, you're getting to get vaccinated whether you like it or not. So if you have to be tied to the bed, you're going to be vaccinated. By the way, there's an interesting putting on my other hat, which is working with a HR organization, which is, it's actually an interesting court case in Israel where a teacher who refused to take the vaccine has been refused return to work. So this is actually something it's an article I'd half written for this week and decided to focus on this, which is what happens, what they call no jab, no job.
Yeah.
How is this going to work out? This is going to become quite a big issue particularly for employers. And if there isn't a legislative framework around this, I think a lot of countries are going to have to start looking, well, how does this work out? What happens if people decide that and because the employer's responsibility is to your colleagues, it's not just to you, it's to your colleagues.
So leper colonies, Derek.
I want to run this past me again.
I think the detention facilities, I think it is ominously heading towards that direction. No,
it's not. But again, which is,
did you ever think we'd be here now, though, like a year ago?
No, I mean, first and foremost, I wish we got the quarantine hotels in place months back. I wish we'd certainly done it before Christmas. I wish we had antigen testing and whatever testing at the airports. I mean, think back that I was writing about this last July and October, which is the stage that this thing wasn't out of control in the airport. The airport staff were doing their level best. Guys, you needed testing. And we didn't have to be filled PCR testing. You needed to have the antigen testing kind of every 2 or 3 days apart. Lots of other countries had found ways around this. Iceland has been doing it since last June. Germany had modeled. By the way, they didn't all work. I'm not saying they all worked, but at least there were attempts to put it in place. We just sat there and watched to see. Now, do I think it's going to let go? No, but I think what's going to be saying to us, listen, boys, we have moral responsibilities to each other and the rest of us. And therefore, look, if should people be vaccinated? In the first phase, I think they should. Maybe this mightn't be an issue in 2 or 3 years' time when we have achieved herd immunity and that'll retain itself. Do you mean
you wouldn't be in favour of mandatory vaccines now?
I think in certain issues you would have to turn around and say, well, look, okay, we can't have you in a public-facing job if you're not going to be vaccinated. Should you lose your job over it? No, but in terms of should it actually have an impact on your employment, possibly? Again, but by the way, I'm not saying this is something to be done lightly. I'm saying which is that needs to be done within a framework because.
Okay, Derek. Yeah. Micheál makes the cover of the Eye.
Again, it's basically the same story as earlier, which is that what he said in Morning Island yesterday.
Yeah.
Actually, just go back up there. I think that's the headline I wanted to discuss, which is no breach. Now let's win independence. That's the message.
That's like not proven, isn't it? The Scottish
doesn't matter.
He
didn't do it. By the way, it is.
But I do think he's been treated pretty.
Look, I have some friends of mine who are close to him, are still very, very close to him, and he certainly feels very, very aggrieved. he believes that there was a move to push him aside and that he became a political inconvenience.
Yeah.
But
I believe that
SNP,
too.
do you know what? That happens in a lot of political parties, which is that the Ancien regime, it is time to get off the stage. So that's so. I mean, it does happen.
Okay, but enough about Michal.
No, I didn't say that. But it'll get funny.
Western sanctions on China were finally,
yeah.
But it sparks instant retaliation. That's going to be a big story, I think.
It is, but again, which is a sign, which is, by the way, this is where Europe is a wee bit exposed, which is it has taken a new Secretary of State in the US, Secretary of State Blinken, to lead the charge on this, where Europe is slow enough in doing that.
Yeah, there was an interesting.
Which is that everyone's watching each other, which is Europe is afraid to move.
Well, we're so beholden. I mean, you know,
it's an expression of realpolitik, which is.
Yeah. The Daily Star, US reveals secret proof about UFOs. The truth is out there, Derek. You were right all along.
Which they don't.
Damn them and those doubters. But I'm joking.
Seriously, no, I don't think that was.
Please look away now if you're a sulky EU
this
leader.
is really daft stuff. Okay.
This is the AstraZeneca job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Works a treat. Even on the oldies, it won't give you blood clots. Yeah. And it's guaranteed to make our old pals in Europe go stark raving bonkers.
Yeah, okay, right. Again, which is look at the countries, by the way, you're right, which is certain countries, Norway sounded the alarm bell on that, not normally seen as be somebody. Denmark, Holland, Belgium. No, we're going straight ahead with this. There's a lot of countries basically turned around and said,
France won't give it to the over 55.
The European Medicines Agency, was the one who said at the very start, there is no concern about this.
Okay.
So the actual European institutions, bizarrely enough, are the ones that say, no, this is safe. National governments decided for an abundance of caution.
Right.
While you had the World Health Organization and every other organization saying to them, look, is there a possible risk? There's a risk with everything. There's a risk with every vaccine. Is this within the margin of error? Absolutely. Is the risk of not being vaccinated greater than the risk of being vaccinated? Without a shadow of a doubt, keep vaccinating. Now, I do think I think the countries who did go this, and that includes us, I think they have shot themselves in the foot on this one because they have now encouraged people to be more. There is a YouGov.
Oh, just a general vaccine. They're kind of.
They've now encouraged it, because there's a YouGov poll showing, I think, looking at a couple of countries around the world who are covering Europe, we're saying, where now kind of vaccine caution amongst the population has jumped up. It had been coming down considerably compared to last year. I think people were saying, only 66% of people will take the vaccine. And those numbers had gone up considerably at the end of this year. It's now creeping back up. It's not huge, but this was an unforced error. It didn't have to happen. The manner in which it was done was far too political. I think this was politics leading, not science.
You'll never get 100%. So I don't. I mean,
no, of course you never. No. That's my point. No, of course you don't.
Okay. Well, I'll be in the. I hope they have broadband in the leper colony. Okay.
That's it. I mean, there's a couple of spare islands down off the coast there, so you should be grand.
Derek, so your leg is better, and how is your mother?
Grand. Strange enough, actually, what is becoming a little bit concerning is that she still hasn't had her vaccine yet in Spain, because certainly we just assume that this is just her own practice, hasn't caught up with it yet, but right. Because where she is living is they've now moved back to outdoor dining. Bars and restaurants, I think, close at 10 o'clock, but indoor dining up to 30% of capacity in well-ventilated places. So, right. There is kind of ability to go around, but again, which is she would be much more comfortable having a vaccine going out because she's in the cohort that should now be vaccinated. So, we're hoping. Do
they contact her, or does she?
Which is everyone's registered again, which is. I think part of the issue here is just an IT system that's slightly out of date. So she's known that she'll be called for, she's already been told, you're on the thing, you're going to be called for, you'll get a call 2 to 3 days beforehand. There'll be an arrangement made for one of the local nurses to pick you up and bring you down and that. So there's that arrangement put in place. It's just waiting for the appointment.
Right, and she'll be on the second. She'll go for a second dose then as well.
Yeah. In Spain they're doing the 2 doses within the.
Okay.
Within the I think it's 3 weeks in Pfizer and 4 weeks with the AstraZeneca. I think it's mainly Pfizer they give them there.
Well, I hope she gets her.
Yeah, that's it. But I mean, I have to say now, for example, I was again talking to a couple of aunts and uncles here on this side who'll be a little bit older again, who both have been an aunt and an uncle married who have been vaccinated this week. So
okay,
it is. I mean, like at the end of it, nobody's saying nothing's happening, but at the speed at which it's happening has to spur on. I mean, people. I'm 50, but I mean, I'm not confident of having it in June, and that's. You shouldn't be feeling that way. I mean, most of us should feel that, look, we're going to be well covered. If I wouldn't in Northern Ireland, I would have been vaccinated already.
Because you'd want to get to Spain, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd need to.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, I can't make. I'm going to need a vaccine. As far as I know, like to get there and get back within a reasonable time frame, you're going to have at least be vaccinated and have PCR tests.
Yeah, I'm buggered.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, and again, which is like, we want to be able to do things, and it's not that I want to go on holidays. I want to go over and see my mother because I mean, there's not been a member of the family over to see her.
Yeah.
Since well before Christmas.
Yeah, that's not good. It's not good.
It's not, and that's and it saying like we have to, like, people do need to live their lives, and I know this is where like you and I would disagree with the rest, but I do think there's an element of personal risk that people have to absorb. And I think the state has to allow for that. It is what is within reason, without intruding on others, and I think that we might disagree on. But I mean, it is within those margins, and I think there are certain reasonable precautions people can take, and that you have to frame a public health policy based on that.
Brilliant, Derek. Thank you very much. I love the new setup. The new
I've been temporarily decamped to the dining room.
LBJ all the way with LBJ.
Yep, that is. What was I going to say to you? Again, I've always said that the great political mantra from the LBJ: never tell a man to go to hell unless you can send him there.
Yeah. On that note, brilliant, Derek. Thank you very much. And your column is on the site today. It's very good.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll talk. See you next week, hopefully.
Hopefully. Look forward to it.